Thank you. That concludes general questions. The next item of business is First Minister's questions. And at question number 1, I call Russell Finlay.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Scotland's only oil refinery ceased operations this week. Hundreds of workers at Grangemouth have lost their jobs and face an uncertain future. Scotland has vast oil reserves, but will now need to import all of our petrol, diesel and other fuels. And this is the price of the SNP and Labour's hostility towards oil and gas. So before more damage is done, will John Swinney drop his government's presumption against new oil and gas exploration?
First Minister.
President, the first thing I want to say is to express my support and solidarity with all those in the Grangemouth workforce who face the prospect of losing their employment as a consequence of the decision by Ineos to stop refining at the refinery at Grangemouth. That is a decision that the company has come to, as Mr Finlay will know from what I've said before. I judge that decision to be premature because I think there is an ongoing need for refining activity. Indeed, refining activity will take place in other parts of the United Kingdom, despite the issues that are faced at Grangemouth. So what the Scottish Government will do is that we will work closely with the workforce. We've done that with Unite the Union. We will support the individuals that are affected. We will take forward the work that has been the source of collaboration between ourselves and the United Kingdom Government and Ineos on alternative business ideas to develop the Grangemouth site as a site that can contribute to the Government's net zero agenda. And of course, an early decision on the Acorn carbon and capture and storage project would significantly help us in the efforts that we're taking forward.
Russell Finlay.
Well, the SNP used to say it's Scotland's oil. Now they just want to stop oil. Nicola Sturgeon opposed the Cambo oil field, while Hamza Youssef opposed Rosebank, even though this would result in higher energy prices and greater reliance on foreign imports. John Swinney personally brought the Greens into government. These dangerous fanatics want to shut down all oil and gas production.
Mr Finlay, I'll just remind you of the need to treat other members with courtesy and respect.
Okay, I'll try again. These dangerous cranks want to shut down all oil and gas production.
Mr Finlay, we have many questions to get through today, and I would just ask the member to remember the need to adhere to our standing orders.
These dangerous ideologues want to shut down all oil and gas production. Now, the Grangemouth refinery is gone and all governments share some responsibility. But the greatest blame lies with a government that turned its back on Scotland's world-leading and innovative oil and gas industry. If John Swinney doesn't support business, how can he act all surprised when businesses fail?
First Minister.
One of the things I'd say to Mr Finlay in response is that we have to recognise the climate emergency that we face and the necessity of adapting to that reality. Now, I know that the Conservatives are involved in a pivot on net zero, and they in fact want to deny the climate challenges that we face. But the underpinning point that I would make to Mr Finlay is at the heart of the approach the Scottish Government has taken on the consideration of any further developments in the North Sea oil and gas sector is that any decision must be the subject of a climate compatibility assessment. Now, that is what the courts have now said is required to take place. And the judgments that have been undertaken by the courts, which have led to the United Kingdom Government having to revisit some of their process for determining these applications, is because of the importance of that point of the climate compatibility assessment. So we cannot deny the realities of what we are facing as a society. What this government will do is support industry to transition to that reality, and the best thing that we can do, the best thing we can all do in this Parliament, is argue for the approval of the Acorn carbon capture and storage project, which the Conservatives refused to authorise when they were in office. The quicker we get Acorn approved, the better for Scotland's climate strategy.
Russell Finlay.
We are being honest with the public about the cost of net zero. They are not. That's the difference. And instead of learning lessons from the SNP's harmful approach towards Labour and oil and gas, the Labour government is copying it. Even senior Labour figures and the trade unions can see it. Tony Blair says the Labour's approach is, and I quote, doomed to fail. The GMB says that just switching off investments in the North Sea is absolute madness. John Swinney expressed his solidarity with the Grangemouth workers. Well, Unite Union says, and I quote, John Swinney and Anas Sarwar will face the wrath of voters for their broken promises to the workers and the people of Grangemouth. Labour's copycat approach will cost more Scottish jobs, it will increase bills, and it will do more to harm the environment by importing energy from overseas. Does John Swinney agree that Labour should in fact do the very opposite to the SNP?
First Minister. Mr Finlay's talked about honesty. In November of last year, Mr Finlay voted for climate change targets, carbon reduction targets in this Parliament. When his United Kingdom government leader questioned the merits, not questioned, actually suggested that these targets be dumped, Mr Finlay called that refreshingly honest. I call it barefaced dishonesty in front of the people of this country. To vote for climate change targets
Let's hear the First Minister.
To vote for climate change targets 1 minute and press this government to act on those climate change targets, and then desert the field when the going gets tough on the instructions of the Conservative leader. Now, what we've done is that we've put in place financial support and assistance to make that available through the Scottish Government's budget, which Mr Finlay didn't support, to assist in the delivery of projects under the Project Willow umbrella, which will secure the future of the Grangemouth site. But I return to my fundamental point. The quickest and best thing that can happen is approval of the carbon capture and storage project at Grangemouth, and I hope Mr Finlay will make up for the failure of the Conservative government and support my call for that today.
Absolutely. Thank you. I would just remind all members of the need to treat one another with courtesy and respect, and be very careful about the language we use to describe other members. Russell Finlay.
I tell you what, it's quite something being lectured from a career politician about barefaced dishonesty when he's built a career on it.
Mr Finlay, please have a seat. We have so many important questions that members wish to put in this session. Now, I'm not going to ask again. Can we please treat one another with courtesy and respect, and let's focus on the business of the day? Russell Finlay.
I assume that the phrase barefaced dishonesty was reasonable and allowable, given the First Minister just used it himself. But I will.
Mr Finlay, I have addressed that comment. I have reminded the First Minister and all members of the need to treat one another with courtesy and respect, and let's carry on our session in that manner.
People in the real world know that using Scotland's oil and gas is plain common sense. And they also know that we need a mix of energy sources for a stable supply and to cut costs for families and businesses. A new generation of nuclear power stations could be part of that. A new poll shows that most SNP voters even agree. Nuclear energy is green and clean. It produces a reliable and steady supply, and it would bring down people's bills. Yet John Swinney is intent on inflicting self-harm in Scotland by blocking all new developments. This is nonsensical, impractical and irresponsible. But he's blinded by ideology. Nuclear makes sense for our economy, it makes sense for our environment. So why doesn't it work for John Swinney?
For lots of reasons, not least of which the cost of nuclear power will not bring down the energy prices of householders in this country. Let me give Mr Finlay. Mr Finlay wants me to press ahead and develop new nuclear power stations. The Hinkley Point C project, a nuclear power station, was due to be completed in 2025, this year, at a cost of £34 billion. It is now expected, on current estimates, to cost £46 billion and be delayed until 2031. Yeah. It's supposed to cost £34 billion. Is going to cost £46 billion. How's that going to bring down fuel bills in this country? So what I would say to Mr Finlay is we have a very developed strategy to
Let's hear the First Minister.
A very developed and successful strategy of attracting investment to develop renewable energy capacity in Scotland. We have significantly achieved decarbonisation of our electricity networks by the development of renewable technology. The Deputy First Minister and I led an investment conference in Edinburgh a few weeks ago, along with the Net Zero Secretary, which brought hundreds of investors into Scotland to invest in renewable energy. That is the future for this country. Clean, green energy that will lower fuel bills, and they'll get that from an SNP government.
Question number 2, Anna Sarwar.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. This week, statistics revealed through Freedom of Information have shown that young Scots are being shockingly failed by this SNP government. All over Scotland, there are children and young people at crisis point in desperate need of mental health support, waiting not just months, but years for treatment. One young person in NHS Lothian was forced to wait 6 years. 6 years for mental health treatment. That is scandalous. Why on John Swinney's watch are people's sons or daughters, nieces or nephews waiting 6 years to get the treatment they need?
First Minister.
So, sir, obviously I'm very happy to address the particular case that Mr Sarwar raises with me today, and to say in general that, and he knows this from my previous answers, that we are working to reduce waiting times for access to treatment for individuals across the health service in Scotland, and we are making progress in a number of areas in relation to that objective. He will also know that the Government has delivered increased investment in mental health support to expand capacity to meet the developing needs that there are amongst young people in Scotland. And I want to make sure that our investments are well targeted to address the issues that Mr Sarwar has put in place. That's why we increased the funding for mental health support, and that's why we're putting in place the assistance that we're putting in place around the country.
Anna Sarwar.
Presiding Officer, the situation is so bad that in today's Daily Record, Rod Stewart has offered to step in and pay for a young Scot to access the care he needs. And the SNP claim they're meeting their target for 90% of children and young people to start mental health treatment within 18 weeks. But we can reveal that they are fudging the numbers and things are much worse than they're letting on. Some health boards are now counting an initial assessment as treatment when in fact young people may still be waiting for months or years for their actual treatment to start. And now they're removing autism and ADHD diagnosis from CAMHS waiting lists. The SNP are fiddling the figures. Why does John Swinney think it's acceptable to mislead the public when it comes to our young people and their mental health treatment?
First Minister.
Well, that's not what we're doing. And what we are doing is we are focusing on making sure that support is in place in communities the length and breadth of the country. Now, it's often the case that CAMHS is simply not the correct service for children seeking a diagnosis for a neurodevelopmental condition like autism or ADHD, unless they have a coexisting mental health condition. And that's the key point that I need to get across to reassure parents who will be anxious about the issues that Mr Sarwar raises. Now, as he knows, we have made progress in the CAMHS waiting list in the last year. The overall CAMHS waiting list decreased by 20.9% in the previous year, and that has continued in the latest quarter. So the Government will be focused on making sure that the support that is necessary for individual young people is available to them, and the right pathway is put in place to meet the needs of every young person in Scotland today. That's the commitment I give to Parliament today. That's what is the foundation of the Government's approach in this respect.
Anna Sarwar.
Let's talk about one of the parents. Michael Gregory is a father from Dumfries. His son Ian was one when a health worker told him that Ian could be autistic and recommended an NHS diagnosis. 3 years on, Ian is still non-verbal and is still waiting on a diagnosis. Michael was a member of the SNP and campaigned for them to be in government. He told me that they should now hang their heads in shame as they've let Scotland down. And when speaking of his son, he said, "Everyone's saying Ian needs this diagnosis. He's autistic. Everyone's sure of it, but at the same time he needs an official diagnosis to get the resources he needs." Rod Stewart heard this heartbreaking story and has stepped in to pay for Ian's diagnosis. Others won't be as lucky. Why on John Swinney's watch do young Scots have to rely on the charity of a rock star to get the treatment they need?
First Minister.
It's not the case that a diagnosis is necessary for young people to get support. It's absolutely critical that I make that. It is absolutely critical that I make that point to Parliament today, because there are other pathways that are available other than diagnosis for ADHD or a neurodiversity condition, which enables young people to attract the support that will assist them in meeting the challenges that they face. So it is vital that I convey that message at First Minister's questions today, so that parents can be reassured that there is support available to meet the needs of individual young people. The Government is taking a range of interventions where we're expanding mental health support, we're supporting the development of community interventions, and we are working to make sure that young people get the support at the earliest possible opportunity. And there are a variety of pathways that enable that to be the case, and that will continue to be the focus of ministers to deliver the services that young people need in our country.
Question number 3, Lorna Slater.
As with their climate targets, the Scottish Government is not on track to meet its targets to cut car use. Instead of putting forward a practical solution for success, it sounds like their preferred solution is just to drop the target altogether. We urgently need to cut car use to tackle the climate emergency. We need cheaper trains, buses and ferries to drive up passenger numbers. We need better connections for rural communities. And we need public ownership of bus services so that they are run for the people who use them, not for private profit. Will the First Minister confirm that the Scottish Government is scrapping the car use reduction target?
First Minister.
As is well understood, there are significant challenges in us meeting the car use target, and that issue is being considered within Government at this time. What's important is that I set out the range of other measures that the Government is taking to invest in supporting the use of public transport, which is our way out of the challenges that we face on this issue. One of those investments is the support to the concessionary travel scheme, which is now much more extensively available since we expanded that, with the support of our colleagues in the Green Party, to under-22s. We have also invested significantly in active travel, with support sustained in the Government's budget, which attracted support in Parliament earlier on this year, to make sure that we address the necessity of changing the priorities of individuals. The Government has examined and explored a range of different options to support the development of this policy. We will continue to do that as we work as part of our climate agenda to reduce car use and to increase the reliance of members of the public on public transport.
Lorna Slater.
Scotland simply cannot afford any more broken promises on climate. If we don't act now, economists have found that Scotland could be up to £140 billion poorer by 2035. People have been paying the price for a lack of progress to insulate our homes and move away from expensive gas heating through their soaring energy bills. There is no route to net zero by 2045 that doesn't involve making our homes warmer and cheaper to heat by insulating them and replacing gas heating systems. Bold action is needed on climate to get Scotland back on track. What new action will next week's programme for government contain to reduce our sky-high energy bills and achieve the rapid cut needed in the use of fossil fuels?
First Minister.
Obviously, the details of the programme for government will be set out next Tuesday, but we've given a commitment already to the introduction of the heat and buildings legislation, which will be brought forward in this parliamentary session to support us in our efforts. We've also invested or committed to investing in this current budget year £300 million in the heat and building programmes, which will increase energy efficiency and provide financial support to do exactly what Lorna Slater has put to me. Now, that comes alongside over £1.63 billion of funding through our heat and building schemes in this parliamentary session so far. So I simply say to Lorna Slater, I understand her passion and determination to make progress on the climate agenda. I share that. It's at the heart of the government's priorities. But we have to also recognise the formidable financial commitments that have been made to decarbonise heating systems in the homes of our constituents, to make sure that we make a contribution through that mechanism to reducing the effect on the climate, and that will be at the heart of the government's agenda as we move forward.
Question number 4, Jackie Dunbar.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the First Minister what assessment the Scottish Government has made of any implications for its work to grow Scotland's economy of the EY Item Club Spring Forecast, which downgraded expectations for UK output over the next 2 years.
First Minister.
Presiding Officer, the EY Item Club forecast reflects the negative impacts that global trade disruption and uncertainty will have on the economy, highlighting the need to commit ourselves to Europe and its single market. We will continue to do all we can to support businesses and households through these challenges. Our programme for government will be focused on delivery, including targeted initiatives to boost Scotland's economic prospects now and for the long term, in particular sustainable and renewable energy resources to draw in new investment and create rewarding and well-paid jobs.
Jackie Dunbar.
It's becoming increasingly clear to the Chancellor that we can't cut our way to growth. The Labour government must urgently abandon its tax on jobs and the austerity fiscal rules that it is operating under. Does the First Minister agree that abandoning these measures is key to unlocking greater investment in our economy, and can he speak to the actions his government has taken to stimulate growth?
First Minister.
Presiding Officer, the United Kingdom Government has taken on fiscal targets which they inherited from the Conservatives, which I think are enormously damaging to a growth agenda. And they've compounded that error by adding to it the increase in employers' national insurance contributions, which is going to be a further depressant on growth within the economy. And I think the conflict and the contradiction between the agenda, the rhetoric about growth and the reality of decision-making is becoming ever more apparent. It's ever more apparent because of the global economic challenges that we face, and the programme for government will set out additional measures the Scottish Government will take to build resilience in the Scottish economy, to support our economy to be internationally focused and with an international outlook, and to make sure that we support and encourage innovation within the Scottish economy, which is the route to success for Scotland.
Murdo Fraser.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. One of the key issues holding back economic growth is the high cost of energy, which we've already discussed in the Chamber today. Last year, the Scottish Government were very enthusiastic about the idea of zonal pricing of electricity. Is that still their view?
First Minister.
There's got to be a careful assessment of the impact of zonal pricing on a variety of different factors. First of all, will it bring down energy prices for householders, which is the absolutely critical and urgent priority? Will it secure the necessary investment in the future of our energy systems? Will it enable us to contribute towards the economic growth and economic development agenda? I notice that Mr Fraser is asking me this particular question when he's associated with a party that has presided over sky-high energy prices in this country and has done absolutely nothing about the problem.
Question number 5, Edward Mountain.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the First Minister, in light of the reported high demand for neurodevelopmental assessment services, when the Scottish Government plans to publish the report on the work that it funded on the 5 tests of change across Scotland, which concluded in March 2024?
First Minister.
Presiding Officer, following development of the Neurodevelopmental specification, which aims to ensure that children and families receive timely support that meets their needs, the Scottish Government has provided £1 million of funding across Highland, Fife, East Lothian, Aberdeen City and Forth Valley for projects to test and support implementation. A report on the 5 tests of change will be published this summer.
Edward Mountain.
Well, not imminently then. In the Highlands, we have a situation where the Health Board has a neurodevelopment assessment waiting list of 1,958 young children. That's 4 times greater than it was 3 years ago. NHS Highlands say some children will have to wait in excess of 5 years to even get an assessment, and it will take some 15 years to fully clear the existing waiting list. Does the First Minister consider it is acceptable that some children will go through their entire school career waiting for an assessment, or for parents to have to fund private care to ensure their children get the most from their schooling?
First Minister.
President, as Mr Mountain will know, NHS Highland was supported with funding for a time-limited test of change, which concluded, as I said earlier on. A new neurodevelopmental pathway is in development with local partners to address exactly the issues that Mr Mountain has put to me. I would encourage NHS Highland to progress this work using the £7.1 million of funding they receive as part of the overall funding given to NHS boards by the Scottish Government to support neurodevelopmental services. I stress the importance of us seeing a range of different interventions, some of which are assisted by the counselling services that the Government has funded in schools. We continue to provide £16 million a year to local authorities to ensure that there are counselling services in every secondary school in Scotland, and we are maintaining financial support through the mental health assistance that we have in place. So all of these factors are contributing to addressing the issues that Mr Mountain puts to me.
Pam Duncan-Glancy.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The First Minister sets out that all of these things are addressing the issue. There are currently 9,000 school-aged children awaiting a diagnosis in Glasgow. At the same time, the IJB in Glasgow cuts mean that planned ADHD pathways have been shelved and vital pilot programmes cancelled. The First Minister can say there are pathways, but these 9,000 children are stuck waiting, some of them for years. So can I ask the First Minister, what does he say to the 9,000 people on the waiting list in Glasgow? Exactly what pathways are there available for them, and when can they expect to get their diagnosis?
First Minister.
Well, I come back to one of the points that I made to Mr Sarwar in my earlier responses, that not all of these young people require a diagnosis to make progress in addressing the circumstances that they face. And therefore, we have got to have available a range of different community-based interventions, which are supported by some of the financial assistance that I've set out, to make sure the needs of those young people are met at the earliest possible opportunity. As a consequence of that, the Government is working to ensure that we have those mechanisms available in all localities to ensure that young people can access those services, and that's what the purpose of the funding that I've set out in my response to Mr Mountain is designed to achieve.
Question number 6, Mark Griffin.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the First Minister what the Scottish Government's response is to reports of local authorities suspending council housing allocations.
First Minister.
President Officer, I'm aware of Edinburgh City Council's recent announcement on this issue. The emergency measure taken by the Council will redirect all available Council-owned housing stock to people experiencing homelessness, with the exception of those with a disability with gold priority for housing or those awaiting discharge from hospital. It will be essential to monitor the impact of this temporary measure as the Council seeks to fulfil its legal responsibilities, as well as reducing the use of unsuitable temporary accommodation in the City. And of course, the Government will continue to deliver our investment of £760 million in £68 million in affordable housing this year, the majority of which will be for social rent.
Mark Griffin.
I thank the First Minister for that answer. The reality of the housing emergency in Scotland is that local authorities like Edinburgh have been left in an impossible position, routinely breaching their legal obligations and now having to take emergency measures, all having huge impacts on families who are in desperate need of an appropriate home. The Scottish Government have now been reviewing the affordable housing supply programme target for over a year, rather than focusing on building those houses. Can the First Minister say if his government will commit to building those 110,000 homes in the final programme for government as it did in the first? And does he recognise that a lack of supply across all tenures is driving the housing emergency? And look at the action being taken by a UK Labour government, now proposed in Canada and Australia and other parts of the world, to really drive up housing supply.
First Minister.
Let me reassure Mr Griffin that the Government is not spending all of its time reviewing the affordable housing supply programme target. It's spending its time making sure that more houses are available for occupation by individuals who are in temporary accommodation or facing homelessness, which is why the actions of the Social Justice Secretary and the Housing Minister in making more resources available to local authorities to support action to tackle void accommodation is making some of the impact on the availability of accommodation in the City of Edinburgh as we speak. And that's because we pivoted in our policy to make sure that more accommodation could be available. We've also, over the course of the lifetime of this government, built more houses per head of population than in any other part of the United Kingdom by a country mile. Exactly. And of course, we've invested £768 million in the affordable housing supply programme for this current financial year, which will be spent and it will support the increased supply of housing. And Mr Griffin and his colleagues never voted for it. So it's a bit of a brass neck coming here, complaining to me about housing and not being prepared to vote for the money to make something happen about it.
Ben McPherson.
Presiding Officer, it is deeply concerning that the City of Edinburgh Council has decided to suspend council housing allocations, especially when so many people in my constituency and others are already waiting to be housed. Labour have been in power in Edinburgh for around 35 of the 40 years of my life, and it is clearly a statement of fact that over decades, Labour-run administrations have not invested enough in Edinburgh's social housing stock. Therefore, in contrast, I would be grateful if the First Minister could outline what additional steps the Scottish Government is taking and has taken and will take to play its part in tackling Edinburgh's acute housing emergency, and what additional actions are being considered with partners to help address this very serious situation.
First Minister.
I want to directly address Mr McPherson's point, because he makes very substantial points about the record of the Labour Party. Since we declared the housing emergency last May, we've prioritised working most urgently with 5 local authorities, which includes Edinburgh City Council, to accelerate and accentuate the interventions in Edinburgh to address the very significant issues that Mr McPherson puts to me. We've also, as I said in my response to Mr Griffin, reshaped investment to ensure that we could support local authorities in tackling void accommodation, and we've also increased the support for adaptations in properties to enable people to be supported in their housing. I also very much appreciated the opportunity to discuss these issues with Mr McPherson when we visited the Granton site some weeks ago, where the government put in £16 million of investment to enable the development of a site on the former Granton Gasworks, which will lead to the creation of, if my memory serves me right, over 800 affordable homes in the City of Edinburgh. That's the type of targeted action the Scottish Government is taking to address the housing emergency, and that will be the underpinning of our housing programme in the years to come.
Thank you. We move to constituency and general supplementaries, and I call Liam Kerr.
Very grateful, Presiding Officer. The P&J's Trapped by RAC campaign reports that Aberdeen's RAC crisis is leading to unremitting and inescapable negative health consequences for homeowners. Now, my solution of using the unspent £20 million housing fund promised to Aberdeen by this government in 2016 is widely reported today. So does the First Minister support my solution, and will he commit his government to doing everything it can to help the Tory homeowners?
First Minister.
I have every sympathy with the homeowners in Tory and the issues that they face. I understand that ministers are meeting with the local authority tomorrow to discuss, with residents and homeowners tomorrow, to discuss these issues, and I'm sure the suggestions that Mr Kerr has made will be part of that conversation.
Rona Mackay.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Scotland's media relies on PA Scotland's output, and I'm sure the First Minister will share my concern at the planned cuts to staff reported this week. These cuts could have considerable impact on news operations in Scotland, particularly in the year running up to an election. Will the First Minister join me in calling on PA Media's management to reconsider these cuts to protect impartial journalism and preserve this important role of media scrutiny in our democracy?
First Minister.
So let me join with Rona Mackay in indicating support for the importance of the role that PA Media and PA Scotland's output forms in the reporting of events and political discourse within Scotland. PA staff are an integral part to the authoritative and reliable reporting of events and political engagement. It's essential for our democracy, and it supports the availability of information to news organisations the length and breadth of the country. So I have written to PA Media urging them to reconsider these proposals, and I do hope the organisation is able to take a different approach which will ensure the independence and the long-term sustainability and resilience of news reporting in Scotland through PA Media.
Carol Mockin.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Alcohol harm continues to be a key concern in Scotland. In East and South Ayrshire, an area which I represent, a combined total of 50 lives were lost to alcohol in 2023. Today, a briefing signed by over 70 organisations has been published which calls for urgent action on alcohol harm. It states that the current Scottish Government action is not proportionate to the scale of the problem and makes a range of recommendations around early diagnosis for liver disease and funding for recovery, treatment and support services. Can I ask the First Minister whether he will be considering this important briefing's proposals as he prepares to publish the programme for Government next week?
First Minister.
These issues and representations will be taken very seriously by Government. We obviously engage through the alcohol and through our support on this effort through the alcohol and drug partnerships around the country, with which Carol Mockin will be familiar in the communities that she represents. We obviously have taken a number of measures to tackle alcohol harm already within our society, and we will continue to consider what further measures we can take. I recognise that the measures that we have taken so far have not addressed all of the circumstances that we face, and we must be open to some of these suggestions that are made. There is, I think, space here for us as a Parliament to find areas of common ground to try to make progress on this agenda, because it requires long-term intervention and action, which is a combination of public awareness and also healthcare and support services to meet the needs of individuals.
Audrey Nicholl.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Scottish Renewables this week published their latest supply chain impact statement, which showcases a diverse range of businesses working across Scotland's renewable energy supply chain, including Apollo, GQS and Turnin Energy in Aberdeen. Will the First Minister join me in welcoming this report, which represents nearly 10,000 jobs? And can he also outline how the Scottish Government is supporting the renewable energy supply chain to capture economic benefits for Scotland?
First Minister.
I join Audrey Nicholl in welcoming the report. The Government, of course, has a long-standing commitment to support supply chain developments in renewables. Indeed, that was very much a focus of the investment conference I referred to earlier on. We're investing up to £500 million over 5 years to anchor our offshore wind supply chain in Scotland. We have also been successful in securing major investments such as Sumitomo at Nig, the investments at Ardesir by Haventus, and there are a number of other projects that are in active development to secure supply chain benefits to Scotland from the significant opportunity of renewable energy.
Sue Webber.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. At Net Zero Committee this week, Sarah Boyd from Lothian Buses made clear that there is a link between the increase in antisocial behaviour on the Lothian bus fleet and under-22 bus passes. Can the Minister provide an update on progress to find a mechanism to remove the under-22 concessionary pass from those that cause persistent antisocial behaviour?
First Minister.
Work is underway to develop this, and if we were to take this step, there would be the likelihood of secondary legislation being required to enable a mechanism to be put in place to enable that to be the case. So these issues are being considered by the Government actively. I would also say, for completeness, that of course the under-22 bus travel initiative has been enormously successful. It's attracted a huge amount of participation and it's increased the mobility of young people, and the overwhelming majority of young people exercise their participation in the under-22 scheme wisely and thoughtfully and effectively. And we have to be prepared to tackle unacceptable behaviour, but we also have to applaud young people for the positive contribution they make to our society.
Faisal Chowdhury.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I was contacted by a constituent with epilepsy who is not eligible for a driver's license. For identification, they use the Citizens Card ID, which is part of the Proof of Age Standard scheme, but find themselves refused service from many places which have a blanket policy for this ID. Does the First Minister share my concern that my constituent is being unfairly treated due to their condition? And would he direct ministers to improve acceptance of the Citizens Card for those who don't have the licence?
First Minister.
I'll certainly look at that point. It's not a point with which I'm familiar, but I'll look at that on Mr Chowdhury's behalf if you'd like to supply me with some more details about the specifics to enable that to be the case. Obviously, there are various mechanisms that are available for individuals, not least of which the under-22 concessionary scheme. I'm not sure the age of the constituent Mr Chowdhury puts to me, but if he would like to write to me, I'll certainly consider those issues.
Kenneth Gibson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Fraser Valdin Institute research has found that almost half of Scottish firms are hiring fewer staff because of the increase to employer national insurance contributions imposed by the UK Labour Government. This tax on jobs takes a wrecking ball to the Scottish Government's ambition of growing Scotland's economy. Can the First Minister advise what discussions ministers have had with their UK counterparts regarding the impact of Labour's unwanted tax hike? And has the Labour Government shown any sign of listening to the concerns of Scottish businesses, charities and the public sector?
First Minister.
This has been an issue that's been raised on a sustained basis by the Finance Secretary with the United Kingdom Government. I agree with Mr Gibson's analysis and commentary that the increase in employers' national insurance contributions is going to deflate employment opportunities within Scotland, and I very much regret that. It will be another impediment in the agenda of delivering economic growth in Scotland, and the focus of the Government, given the enormous external challenges that we face, is to make sure that we do all that we can to support economic growth, and it would assist us enormously if the UK Government changed their position on employers' national insurance contribution rises.
Douglas Ross.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. This week, Scottish Teachers for Permanence published their 2025 report about probationary teachers and their views. It makes grim reading. 80% of those surveyed are set to end their probationary year without a permanent job. Over 75% are set to tell us that they are not feeling supported during the time they should be supported most. And once they've qualified, these highly trained teachers are saying, in their own words, they are being thrown onto the supply pile, scrambling for scraps of work with no security, no permanent role, and in some cases, not even guaranteed supply work. The Scottish Government has said supply is a choice, but that is not true. So can the First Minister tell us, if his government truly value education, why are they abandoning the next generation of teachers at the very start of their careers?
First Minister.
Well, we're not doing that. The Education Secretary met with the Scottish Teachers for Permanence in November, and they discussed a range of the issues that Mr Ross raises. We have, of course, seen an expansion in the number of school teachers in post since 2014, and the number of permanent posts has remained stable at more than 80% over the last 10 years. Obviously, decisions about employment of teachers are taken by local authorities, and the Government works closely with local authorities to ensure that we increase levels of permanence within the teaching workforce so that the investment that's made in training high-quality teachers can be used to the benefit of pupils around the country.
Paul O'Kane.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Earlier this month in my West Scotland region, in two horrific incidents just days apart, 2 young girls were brutally assaulted by other teenagers. The incidents were recorded and shared widely on social media, and I'm sure that the whole Parliament will agree that such incidents are completely unacceptable and will join me in the concerns that these are now an increasing list of similar incidents across the country. The answer so far from the Government to the wider issue seems to have been that the Education Secretary has led a number of summits on the issues. But surely an important part of the response from Government has to be more safe places and local facilities to support young people. So can I ask the First Minister, what decisive action will his Government finally take to tackle these issues, reverse years of cuts and closures to youth centres, youth clubs and programmes due to the chronic underfunding of local authorities by this Government, or is he simply going to instruct the Cabinet Secretary for Education to hold yet another talking shop?
First Minister.
Well, we had a gathering which I drew together as a consequence of the initiative taken by some families who were affected by the unacceptable violence that Mr O'Kane refers to and initiated by the Daily Record, and I was pleased to host that summit on the 13th of January with cross-party representation. If my memory serves me right, Polly McNeill attended from the Labour Party and made a constructive contribution to that discussion with members of all parties and with ministers, and we listened to the voices of young people. Let me say at the outset, what Mr O'Kane recounts to Parliament is completely unacceptable, and we are taking a number of measures through the various awareness campaigns that we take forward around Mentors in Violence production programme, which is delivered in over 200 schools across local authorities in the country, through the work of Cashback for Communities, through the work of Fearless, the youth arm of Crime Stoppers, and the work of the Scottish Violence Reduction Unit, all of which are aimed to create a culture in which the issues that Mr O'Kane sets out are not happening to young people. We do, of course, invest in facilities around the country through a variety of different interventions in the Government's budget, which of course delivered a real terms increase to local authorities in their funding, and which also supports third sector interventions to meet the needs of communities around the country, and we will continue to do that.
Thank you. That concludes First Minister's questions. The next item of business is a members' business debate in the name of Emma Harper, and there will now be a short suspension to allow those leaving the public gallery and the chamber to do so.